The wind was sharp, like tiny knives, cutting across Zalia's cheeks as she walked with her daughter in her arms. Snow fell heavily from the sky, covering the streets in white, but Zalia could not feel its beauty anymore. Her feet were numb, her legs weak, and her thin cloak barely protected her from the cold. In her arms, Lena coughed weakly, her small body trembling. Zalia looked down at her daughter's face, pale, cold, and tired, and her heart cried silently. She had knocked on 11 doors already. 11 rejections, 11 faces turning away, 11 words. Go away. We don't help aliens. Find another place. No one even looked her in the eyes. She stood now in front of the 12th door, her fingers shaking as she reached for the old buzzer. She pressed it, and the sound echoed inside. Footsteps, a shadow. And then the door creaked open slightly. A woman with graying hair looked at her, squinting. Then her eyes dropped to the child in Zalia's arms. Please. Zalia whispered, her voice rough from wind and pain. My daughter. We just need warmth. A corner. Please. The woman looked at her for only a second more before saying coldly, I have children of my own. Then the door closed. Zalia didn't move for a moment. She stood there, breathing in the cold air, trying not to fall. Then she turned, clutching Lena tighter, and walked forward again. Lena whispered softly, Mommy, are we going to die? Zalia stopped, her throat tightening, her body shaking harder than before. No, she said, her voice trembling but firm. We will find help. I promise. But she didn't believe her own words. She had nothing left. No food, no home, no friends on this strange colony world. Only hope, and that too was fading fast. Her people had landed here after their planet was lost to war. The humans allowed a few to stay, but many like her were left in the shadows, ignored, feared, and blamed for the past. She walked along the alley until she saw one more house. The 13th door. It was small, half broken, with cracked windows and a dull flickering light coming from inside. It didn't look rich, or safe, or welcoming, but Zalia was out of choices. She stood before it, closed her eyes, and whispered something in her language, an old prayer her mother used to say. Then she raised her hand and knocked. The sound was weak, almost lost in the wind. She waited, listening. Her heart beat loud in her ears. Nothing happened at first. Then, footsteps, slow and steady. The door creaked open, and a tall human man stood there, wearing a jacket with oil stains, his hair messy, and a tired look on his face. He looked down at her alien skin, her glowing blue eyes, and her child in rags. Zalia fell to her knees, her strength gone. Please. She begged, barely louder than a whisper, show mercy. Please. The man didn't speak. He looked at her daughter, who blinked at him with tired eyes. And then back at Zalia. Seconds passed, long and silent. Zalia waited for him to say it. The words she already knew. No, or leave, or you're not welcome. But he didn't say that. He opened the door wider, stepped aside, and said quietly, come in. Zalia's breath caught, her mind not understanding what she had just heard. Are you sure? She asked, her voice shaking. I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't, he replied simply. It's warm inside, and your daughter looks like she needs that more than I do. Zalia stood slowly, every part of her body aching, and stepped. Inside, warmth touched her skin like a soft blanket, and she almost collapsed from the feeling. He closed the door behind her, locked it, and walked into the small living room. A heater stood in the corner, and a kettle whistled on the stove. Sit down, he said, pulling a blanket from the couch. You can rest here. Zalia sat carefully, placing Lena beside her, wrapping the blanket around her daughter first. The man poured warm water into a cup and handed it to her. Zalia took it with shaking hands. Thank you, she whispered, eyes full of tears. He didn't say anything. He just sat in the chair across from her, watching the snow fall outside the window. The silence was no longer cold, it was kind, and for the first time in weeks, Zalia felt something warm inside her. Not from the heater, not from the blanket, but from the 13th door. The one that didn't close. The one that had a human with a heart. The warmth inside the small house felt strange to Zalia. After days of cold wind and closed doors, the silence of this place was soft, not cruel. She sat on the edge of the old couch, still holding her daughter. Afraid to relax fully, Lena was already asleep, wrapped tightly in the blanket the human man had given them, her breathing slow and soft. Zalia didn't know the man's name yet, and he hadn't asked for hers. He moved quietly in the small kitchen, pouring something warm into 2 mugs. Then he walked over and offered one to her. "Tea," he said simply. "I don't have much, but it helps in the cold." Zalia took it slowly, bowing her head in thanks. "You're very kind," she said softly. He didn't smile, but his voice was calm. "Just human," he replied, then sat in the chair across from her for a moment. They just sat there, 2 strangers from different worlds, bound by a single moment of kindness. "My name is Darian," the man said after a pause. "You don't have to tell me yours if you don't want to." Zalia looked up, surprised, then spoke carefully. "Zalia," she said, "and this is Lena, my daughter." Darian nodded, his eyes going to the child curled up on the couch. "She's been through a lot," he said quietly. Zalia looked down at Lena and nodded slowly. "Too much for someone so small," she whispered. "We've been running for weeks." "From what?" Darian asked, not accusing, just curious. "From everyone," Zalia said with a tired voice. "From hunger, from hate, from people who see us as nothing." Darian didn't respond right away. He looked into his mug as if it held answers. Then said, "People fear what they don't understand." Zalia nodded, "And they don't try to understand either." Darian sighed and leaned back. "This colony, it wasn't always like this," he said. "Before the wars, people helped each other more. I remember when kindness was normal." Zalia said softly, "Not rare." There was a long silence. The kind that didn't feel heavy, just real. Lena stirred slightly in her sleep, and Zalia tucked the blanket around her more tightly. "I saw you outside the window," Darian said suddenly. "You looked like you were about to fall." "I was," Zalia admitted, "if you hadn't opened the door." She didn't finish the sentence. Darian didn't need her to. He stood and walked to the small shelf by the wall, pulling out a folded mattress and laying it on the floor. "You and Lena can sleep here tonight," he said. "There's an extra pillow and another blanket." Zalia stood, still unsure. "Are you sure?" she asked. "We don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he replied. "You're just people who need help." Zalia slowly laid Lena down on the mattress, tucking her in carefully. Then she sat beside her daughter, folding her hands in her lap, unsure whether she should lie down or stay awake. "You can rest," Darian said gently. "You're safe here." Zalia looked into his eyes, and for the first time she noticed how kind they were. Not soft or weak, but kind. With strength underneath, eyes that had probably seen pain, but hadn't let it turn to hate. "Thank you," she said again, her voice full of emotion. Darian gave a small nod and turned off the main light, leaving only a small lamp glowing in the corner as he walked to the back room. He paused, then added, "I don't care what others say. If someone needs help, I help." Zalia stared at the door after he left. That sentence stayed in her mind, repeating like a soft melody. She lay beside Lena, staring at the ceiling, listening to her daughter's breathing and the quiet hum of the heater. Outside, the snow continued to fall, cold and silent. But inside, for the first time in many weeks, Zalia felt warmth that went deeper than her skin. Not from the blanket or the tea, but from the human with kind eyes who opened the 13th door. She closed her eyes and whispered one final prayer before sleep. Not for food, not for shelter, but for Darian, because kindness like his was rare, and the universe needed more of it. The morning light pushed gently through the cracked curtains, painting soft gold across the walls of Darian's small home. Zalia opened her eyes slowly, her body aching but her heart calm for the first time in many days. Beside her, Lena still slept, her little fingers clutching the blanket like a lifeline. Zalia sat up and stretched, her back stiff from sleeping on the floor. But she didn't complain. It was warm, they were safe, and they had survived another night. She stood quietly and moved toward the kitchen, where she found Darian already awake. Sitting at the table with a small device in his hand, he looked up and nodded. "Morning," he said simply. Zalia nodded back. "Good morning," she whispered. He handed her a small piece of toast, all slightly burned on the edges, and poured some tea into 2 cups. "I don't have much," he said, "but it's warm." Zalia took it gratefully. "It's more than we had." They sat together in silence for a moment, drinking, listening to the soft hum of the heater and the distant sounds of colony workers outside. Then Darian asked gently, "You said you've been running. Want to tell me from what?" Zalia didn't answer at first, her eyes fixed on the rising steam of her tea. Then she began to speak, her voice soft and heavy. "Our home world was destroyed," she said, "not by war at first, but by greed." She told him about her planet, green fields, deep forests, and floating cities. Then came the invaders, not aliens, but corporations from larger systems who saw her world as rich in minerals. They came with machines, offers, contracts, and when her people said no, they came back with weapons. The skies burned, the rivers dried, and the land became poison. Her husband had been a guard, one of the last defenders of the capital. He died trying to protect a group of children, she said, her voice shaking. He wasn't a soldier, just a father with courage. Darian listened without interrupting, his face still, but his hands clenched. Zalia continued, "After he died, we were loaded onto ships, the ones who survived. She and Lena had been placed in the lowest refugee zone of a trade station for months, then transferred again. This time to the human colony where she now sat. No one wants us," she said bitterly. "They say we bring trouble, we steal food, we spread disease. But we only want to live." Darian finally spoke. "People believe lies more than truth when it's easier." Zalia looked at him, eyes filled with quiet pain. "Even here, on this colony, I tried to work," she said. "I cleaned waste units, fixed pipes, anything. But the moment they saw my skin or heard my voice, the door would shut," she added. Darian leaned back in his chair, staring at the wall. "I've seen it before," he said. "This world looks clean, but there's rot under the surface." Just then, there was a knock on the door, quick and sharp. Zalia froze, her hand tightening around the cup. Darian stood slowly, walked to the door, and opened it halfway. Outside stood a tall man in a clean uniform, one of the colony watchmen. "You've got a visitor, Darian," the man said coldly, eyes darting past him into the house. "We got reports of a fugitive alien here." Darian didn't blink. "She's not a fugitive," he said calmly. "She's a mother." The watchman's lips tightened. "We don't make exceptions for feelings." Darian's voice dropped lower. "You'll need a warrant." The man narrowed his eyes. "We'll be watching you," he said, then walked away. Boots crunching on the snow, Darian closed the door, locked it, and turned back to Zalia. "They're already talking," he said. "I figured they would." Zalia looked at the floor, guilt rising in her chest. "I should go," she whispered. "Before you get into trouble." "No," Darian said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong, but they'll come again," she said, voice breaking. "They always come again." Darian walked over, sat across from her again, and looked into her eyes. "Then let them come," he said. "This time, someone's going to stand with you." Zalia didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not since her husband died. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was rough and warm, like everything about him strong. Simple, human. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing in us." Darian gave a small nod. "You don't need to prove you belong," he said. "You already do." In that moment, Zolia felt something she hadn't in a very long time. Not fear, not hunger, not shame, but the beginning of trust. Her past had hunted her across stars, through cities and camps and cold doors. But here, in this small, broken house, her past had finally slowed down. And maybe, just maybe, her future had found a place to begin. The snow hadn't stopped falling since morning. Outside Darian's home, a thick white blanket now covered the streets, the rooftops, and the quiet sidewalks. But inside the house, it was warm, filled with the soft crackling of the old wall heater and the scent of hot broth. Zalia stirred the pot slowly, her eyes focused on the steam as it rose and disappeared into the air. She hadn't cooked in a real kitchen in months. It felt strange, but peaceful. In the corner, Lena sat cross-legged on the floor, trying to fix a small, broken music box she had found in a pile of old items. The tiny box was dented and dusty, but when she turned the knob, it played a soft tune, slow and a little broken, but still beautiful. Darian came in from outside, brushing snow off his shoulders, his boots soaked, his hands red from the cold. He dropped a small bag on the table, got some bread and dried meat from the back market. He said, "Not much, but enough." Zalia smiled gently. "That's more than we need." Darian looked at the music box, then at Lena. She found that in the storage room. He said, "Used to belong to my sister." Zalia glanced at him. "You had a sister?" He nodded slowly. A long time ago, there was something in his voice, a weight, a shadow, but he didn't say more. Zalia didn't ask. Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow, slow and deliberate. Then came a loud knock on the door. Everyone froze. Lena dropped the music box and it played a broken note before falling silent. Darian stepped toward the door and opened it slightly, just enough to see who it was. A tall woman in a brown coat stood there, Mrs. Halber. One of the older residents from across the street. Her lips were tight and her arms were crossed. "I've heard talk," she said, her voice sharp like ice. "They say you're keeping an alien inside." Darian didn't blink. "That's none of your business," he said flatly. "People are worried," she continued. "Worried she's dangerous, that the child is sick, that you've been fooled." Zolia heard every word from where she stood in the kitchen, her body tense, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I don't care what they say," Darian replied. "You can leave now." Mrs. Halber narrowed her eyes. "Don't forget who your neighbors are." "Darian," she hissed, "and who they report to." Then she turned and disappeared into the snow. Darian closed the door with more force than needed. Locking it again, Zalia said nothing as he returned to the kitchen, but her face had turned pale. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should go." "No," he said quickly. "You're not leaving because some bitter woman can't mind her own business." "But I don't want trouble for you," she said, her voice shaking. "I've seen what happens when people talk." Darian looked at her, his eyes firm. "Let them talk," he said. "We're not doing anything wrong." Lena slowly picked up the music box again and turned the knob. A soft tune filled the room. Broken but beautiful, it made the silence less heavy. That night, after dinner, Zolia sat on the couch beside Darian, while Lena slept on the mattress, her small hand still resting on the music box. Zolia looked at the window, where snowflakes landed gently on the glass and melted away. She spoke softly, her voice almost a whisper. On my world, we believed snow carried the voices of the lost. Darian looked at her curiously. Voices? Yes, she said. We were taught that when snow falls silently, the dead are whispering, reminding us they're watching. Darian leaned back, thinking. That's beautiful, he said. And a little sad, Zalia smiled faintly. It was always comforting to me, she said. I used to imagine my husband was speaking through the snow. They sat in silence for a moment, the music box playing its slow tune. Then Darian asked, what would he say to you now? Zalia looked at the ceiling, her eyes soft. He'd tell me to keep going, she whispered. To be strong for Lena, to trust just one more time. Darian looked at her, not with pity, but with respect. You've done more than most people could, he said. And you're still standing. Zalia turned to him slowly, their eyes meeting in that quiet moment. With snow outside and the tune of a broken music box inside, something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but something strong, trust, maybe even the beginning of healing. Outside, the whispers and the snow grew louder, not from the dead, not from ghosts, but from the voices of the living neighbors. Gossip, fear, and danger creeping closer. But inside the small house, for now, there was warmth, music, and a fragile peace. And sometimes, that was enough. The days grew colder, but the silence around Darian's house grew louder. People stopped speaking to him in the streets. Neighbors no longer waved, and shopkeepers gave him cold stares instead of greetings. Everywhere he went, he could feel the weight of their judgment. Zalia noticed it too, through the windows, through the way people pointed. The way they whispered when he walked past. Lena, innocent and unaware, simply smiled when Darian came home each evening, her small arms wrapping around his leg in a hug, and Darian smiled back even when his heart felt heavy. Inside the home, there was laughter, soft music from the broken box, and the scent of soup or bread outside. There was a growing storm, and it wasn't just the snow. One night, Darian came home later than usual. His jacket soaked, his eyes tired. Zalia helped him take off his boots, her hands gentle. You look like you walked through war, she said with a soft smile. Almost did, he muttered. People are talking more now, angry talk. He didn't want to worry her, but he couldn't hide the truth anymore. I heard a few say we're corrupting the neighborhood, he added. One even said they might take it into their own hands. Zalia lowered her eyes. It's my fault, she said. I've brought this on you. No, he said firmly, reaching to hold her hand. You brought light into this house, not trouble. But even as he said the words, the wind outside howled louder, like it knew what was coming. That night, after Lena was asleep, Darian checked all the locks, double-checked the back window, and left a small flashlight near the door. Just in case, he didn't sleep much, and neither did Zalia. The next evening, the fire came. It started as a faint crackling outside the front door, then the scent of smoke, sharp and bitter, crept into the house. Darian jumped from his seat and rushed to the door, pulling it open to find flames licking up from a burning piece of cloth. Soaked in fuel, someone had thrown it against the wall, a warning. He grabbed a blanket, ran outside, and beat the flames down until only black marks were left on the wood. Zalia had grabbed Lena, holding her tight in the corner, her own body shaking from fear and memory. When Darian returned inside, his face was red from heat and rage. They're not just whispering now, he said through clenched teeth. They're planning something. Zalia looked up, eyes wide with panic. We should leave, she whispered. Tonight. Darian stared at her, breathing hard. And go where? Back into the snow. Into another closed door. I can't let Lena get hurt, she said, her voice cracking. Not because of me. Darian dropped to his knees in front of them. You won't leave, he said softly. Not alone, not again. Zalia felt tears rise to her eyes. Why are you doing this? She asked. You barely know us. He looked at her with fire in his voice, but kindness in his eyes, because someone has to. The next morning, the black scorch marks were still on the wall, visible to anyone passing by. And many did, walking slower than usual, pausing to stare, saying nothing but saying everything with their silence. Darian didn't stay home that day. He went to the local council office, stood before the guards, and demanded a meeting with the colony commander. The guards laughed at first. One man, a mechanic, asking to speak to power. But something in his voice, in his eyes, made them take him seriously. They told him to wait, so he waited. Standing in the cold lobby for hours, finally, a door opened and he was led into a quiet room. Inside sat Commander Ruthan, an older man with sharp eyes and a colder heart. You've made some noise, the commander said, not looking up from his tablet. I want protection for the alien woman and her child. Darian said, without pause. They're in danger? Danger from whom? The commander asked, finally looking up. From my neighbors, Darian said. From your citizens? Commander Ruthan raised an eyebrow. Why should we care about one refugee woman? Darian leaned forward, voice tight, because if we don't protect the innocent, we're no better than the ones who destroy worlds. There was a silence between them, thick and heavy. The commander didn't answer right away, then finally said, Bring her to speak before the council. Darian nodded once. We will, he said, then turned and left. Back at home, Zalia was watching Lena sleep, her fingers stroking her daughter's hair. Darian returned, sat beside her, and said, You have to speak. Zalia looked at him, afraid. They won't listen. Maybe not, he said. But if we don't try, they'll silence you forever. She nodded slowly, fear in her eyes, but also a spark of courage, because even though the fire had come, they were still standing, and together they would not burn. The council chamber was cold, not in temperature, but in feeling. Gray walls, smooth metal floors, and high ceilings made the room feel more like a machine than a place for justice. Zalia stood at the edge of the room, her hands shaking slightly. Holding tightly onto Lena's small hand, Darian stood beside them, his shoulders broad, his jaw set. The council members, 5 in total, sat on raised chairs, their faces unreadable, their uniforms crisp and spotless. Commander Ruthan sat in the center, hands folded, eyes sharp as steel. Zolia took a deep breath, then another, trying to find the words that had hidden in her heart for so long. Darian gave her a nod, just a small one, but it was enough. She stepped forward, her voice quiet at first, but clear. My name is Zalia, she said. I am not here to ask for pity, only for a chance. One of the council members leaned forward. A chance for what? He asked without emotion. Zalia glanced down at Lena, who looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. A chance to live, she said. To be seen as more than a problem, more than an alien. Some members shifted in their seats, uninterested. Others listened, but with cold curiosity. I was a healer on my home world. Zalia continued, her voice gaining strength. I worked in small villages, helped the injured, delivered babies, and grew food. She paused. When war came, I treated the wounded. Both sides, not because I agreed with everyone, but because I believed every life matters. One member scoffed under his breath, but Ruthan raised a hand to silence him. My husband died protecting children during the final battle, Zalia said, and I've been running ever since. She looked straight at the commander now. 12 doors shut in my face. She said 12 people saw my daughter freezing and turned away. Her voice cracked slightly. Only the 13th door opened. She turned to Darian, who stood quietly, his eyes on her, strong and silent. This human, this man, did not ask what I was. Or where I came from, she said. He saw a child in need, and he showed mercy. She looked back to the council, her voice now firm. I am not a danger, I am a mother. I don't ask for special treatment, only a place to stand, a chance. To work, to live, to raise my daughter in peace. The room was silent for a long moment. Then one councilwoman asked, "What about the fire?" Darian stepped forward now. That was not started by her. He said, his voice deep, steady, "It was meant to scare us, to drive them out. And you protected them," another council member said, as if accusing him. "Yes, Darian." Said proudly, because they deserved it. He took a breath, looked around the room. This colony was built by people who ran from war, from hunger, from fear, just like her. He stepped closer. If we shut our doors to the helpless, now? Then we've forgotten who we are. Some of the members looked down, uncomfortable. Others stared hard, unmoved. Finally, Commander Ruthon stood, walking slowly to the edge of the platform. He looked at Zalia, then at Lena, then at Darian. This is not the first time someone has stood here begging for a place. He said. Most were turned away. Zalia's breath caught, but she didn't look down. But few spoke with such honesty, the commander continued. And few had someone like you standing beside them. He turned to the other council. Members, I propose a trial period, he said. Let her stay, work, and prove herself. 3 months, one councilman said. Then we decide. Ruthan nodded. 3 months, Zalia blinked. Unsure what she had just heard, Darian smiled and turned to her. It means you stay, he said gently. You have a chance. Zalia dropped to her knees and held Lena close, tears falling silently from her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, Commander Ruthon didn't smile. But his voice was firm. Don't waste it, he said, then turned and left the chamber. As the others followed him out, some still frowning, some thoughtful. Darian placed a hand on Zalia's shoulder. You did it, he said softly. No. She replied, we did. Outside, the snow still fell, but it no longer felt like a curse. Zalia stepped into the cold air, holding Lena close. She looked up at the sky and smiled through her tears. For the first time, she wasn't running from her past. She was walking toward a future, and she wasn't alone. The snow had finally stopped for the first time in weeks. The skies above the colony were clear, soft morning light shining down on the white rooftops and icy paths. Zalia stood at the window of Darian's home, holding a warm mug of tea in both hands, watching the world outside with quiet eyes. Lena sat near the heater, gently humming the broken tune from the music box, her small hands trying to fix it once again. The silence in the house was peaceful, not empty, but full of healing, of breath, of new hope. Darian walked in from the back door, his boots wet from the slush, his face red from the cold. He smiled at the sight of them, like he always did now, and shook the snow off his jacket. The food center said they'll let you help next week. He told Zalia, nothing fancy, just basic work, but it's a start. Zalia nodded, a soft smile on her face. That's more than I hoped for. You earned it, Darian replied. The council may not admit it, but people are watching. They see you working, raising your child, not causing harm, Zalia looked down into her tea. I still feel like I don't belong, she whispered. Like I'm just borrowing time. You're not, Darian said firmly. This is your home now too. She looked up at him, unsure, even with what people say. Especially because of that, he said. Let them talk. Words can't break what we're building here. Lena stood and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his legs like she did every morning now. He scooped her up with a chuckle and held her against his chest. Her laughter filling the room, Zalia watched, her heart warm and aching all at once. It had only been 2 weeks since the council allowed her to stay. And every day still felt like a blessing borrowed from a dream. But now, it also felt real. Later, that afternoon, Zolya stepped out into the town for the first time without fear. She held Lena's hand tightly as they walked down the path, past the homes that once turned her away. Some doors stayed closed, curtains drawn, cold stares still. Present, but a few were different now. One man gave a nod, unsure but no longer cruel. A young woman gave Lena a piece of bread with a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning as they walked past the repair station. A voice called out, "Hey Zolya!" It was Mara, the engineer Darian used to work with, wiping her hands. On a rag, Darian says, "You're good with wiring." Zolya blinked in surprise. "I used to fix water grids and panels," she said slowly. "Well," Mara said, tossing her a toolkit. "Come help me out. I'll pay you what I can." Zolya hesitated, then smiled. "I'll be back after I take Lena home." Mara nodded. "Bring her. She can play with my kids in the back." As they continued walking, Lena looked up at her mother. "Mama, are we safe now?" Zolya stopped for a moment, kneeling down to look into her daughter's eyes. "I don't know if we're completely safe," she said, "but we're not alone anymore." That night, Darian cooked dinner badly, as always, and Zolya teased him for burning the bread again. They laughed, and Lena laughed with them, her eyes full of joy. After dinner, Zolya sat near the window, holding the music box, trying once more to fix the loose gear. Suddenly, with a small click, it turned. The melody played again, not broken this time, but smooth and soft. Lena clapped her hands, and Darian smiled from across the room. Zolya listened to the tune with tears in her eyes. It wasn't just music, it was proof. Proof that broken things could be repaired, that wounds could heal, that lost hearts could find their way back to warmth. She looked at Darian, the human who had opened the 13th door, the one no one else would, and felt something deep inside her shift. Something more than safety, more than survival. It was belonging. Maybe not forever, maybe not perfect, but real, one home, two souls from different worlds. And a child who laughed like the stars. Tomorrow would bring more work, more whispers, more walls to break. But tonight, they had peace, music, and each other. And sometimes, that was more than enough.